Can I hide here? The old woman's voice cracked like dry wood splitting under pressure. She grabbed the sleeve of the biggest, most terrifying man in the parking lot, a man whose leather vest alone made grown adults cross the street, and she held on like he was the last solid thing left in her world. Cole Harrison looked down at her hand on his arm. Then he looked up at the two men in expensive suits, standing 20 feet away watching, and something shifted behind his eyes. Baher. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Margaret Whitmore pulled her 2009 Honda Civic into the parking lot of Delaney's roadside diner on the edge of Billings, Montana. She did not pull in because she was hungry. She pulled in because the blue sedan had been behind her for 11 miles, and when she slowed down, it slowed down, and when she sped up, it matched her speed within seconds. And Margaret Whitmore had been alive for 74 years, and she knew what it looked like when someone did not want you to know they were following you. She sat in the car for 30 seconds with the engine running. Her hands were shaking, not from cold. The heater in the old Honda still worked perfectly. Her hands were shaking because she had been running for 7 days, sleeping in rest stops and church parking lots, paying for everything with the emergency cash she kept taped inside her copy of Jane Austen's Persuasion, and she was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. She was exhausted in her bones, in her memory, in the part of her that kept replaying the last phone call she ever had with her grandson 3 weeks ago when Ethan's voice was low and careful and he said, "Grandma, I need you to listen to me very closely right now. I need you to do something, and I need you to not ask me why until it's over." She had not heard his voice since. She had tried to keep moving. She had done exactly what he told her to do. She had abandoned her cell phone in a gas station bathroom in Bozeman, broken the SIM card with the heel of her shoe, paid cash for everything, stayed off the highways when she could, and told no one. Not her daughter Carol, not her neighbor Ruth, not her pastor, where she was going, because Ethan had been very clear about one thing. Trust no one in suits, he had said. She had not fully understood what that meant until the second day when a man in a very nice gray jacket knocked on the window of her car at a rest stop outside of Missoula and said he was a federal investigator and that he was there to help her. He had a badge, he had a friendly smile, he had a voice that was professionally warm, the kind of warm that comes not from sincerity, but from training. Margaret had looked at his badge. Then she had looked at his shoes. A federal investigator working a field assignment in the rain would not be wearing $400 Oxfords. She said thank you very much and drove away before he could get back to his own car. Now she sat in the parking lot of Delaney's diner and watched in her rearview mirror as the blue sedan pulled in behind her and parked 2 rows back. 2 men got out, both in suits, both moving with that particular kind of unhurried confidence that is more threatening than urgency because it says, "We are not worried about losing you. We know exactly where you are." Margaret closed her eyes. She breathed. She thought about Ethan, about the thumb drive he had mailed her 3 weeks ago wrapped in a piece of paper with nothing written on it except, "If something happens to me, give this to someone you trust completely. Someone with no connection to money, politics, or government. Someone who has nothing to lose from telling the truth and nothing to gain from hiding it." The thumb drive was in her bra, tucked against her left side where it had been for 7 days. She opened her eyes. She looked at the diner entrance, and she saw them. 6 motorcycles parked in a tight row along the far edge of the lot. 6 men in leather vests standing outside, some smoking, some talking, one laughing at something another one said. The vests had patches, the kind of patches that meant something specific in Montana, in every state. The kind of patches that made other people in parking lots take a longer route to their cars. Margaret had grown up in a generation that understood exactly what those patches meant. Every instinct she had developed over 7 decades of living told her to go inside the diner, order coffee, call the police, and wait. But Ethan had told her not to trust anyone in suits. And every person she had called or tried to reach in the past 7 days had either not answered or answered in a way that made her feel less safe than before the call. The 2 men from the blue sedan were walking toward her now. Not running, not aggressive, just walking with that professional patience that was somehow worse than if they had been shouting. Margaret got out of the car. She did not go toward the diner. She turned and walked directly toward the motorcycles. Later, she could not fully explain the logic of it. She would try, in the months that followed when people asked her how she had made that decision. What calculation had run through her mind in those 3 seconds between opening her car door and pointing her feet in that direction? She would say that it was not entirely rational. She would say that she had been running for 7 days, and she was tired, and she was scared, and she needed someone to stand between her and those two men. And the men in the expensive suits were clearly connected to money and clearly connected to some kind of official infrastructure. And the men with the motorcycle patches were in that specific moment in that specific parking lot, the only people she could see who had no reason to be part of the world that was hunting her. She walked toward the largest one. He was not the tallest, but he had that quality that certain people have where they seem to take up more space than their physical body occupies. He was broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, with eyes that were watching the parking lot in a way that was not paranoid, but was not careless either. He wore a leather vest over a black flannel shirt, and his hands were big and scarred and still hanging at his sides like tools resting between jobs. His name was Cole Harrison, though. Margaret did not know that yet. She walked up to him and grabbed his arm. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. "Can I hide here?" The question came out smaller than she intended. Quieter, like something her voice had been saving for the right moment and finally decided this was it. Every man in that group went still. Cole did not look at her with suspicion. He did not look at her with the performative kindness of someone calculating how to manage the situation. He looked at her the way a person looks when they see something real in front of them and they are deciding how to respond to something real. He said, "Those two men behind you, are they with you?" "No," she said. "They're following me." Cole glanced past her just for a second. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. Very slightly, the way a large animal shifts its weight when it has made a decision. "Okay," he said. Just that, okay. He stepped slightly in front of her, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, just repositioning so that his body was between her and the two men crossing the parking lot. The other 5 men moved without being told. Margaret noticed it. They did not huddle or confer. They simply redistributed themselves around the area in a way that was not obviously threatening but was completely effective. The parking lot had geometry now that it had not had 30 seconds ago. The 2 suited men stopped about 15 feet away. The one on the left was maybe 45 with a face that had been handsome once and was now carrying too many years of careful smiling to still feel genuine. He held up both hands, palms out in the universal gesture of "look, no weapons." "Sir," he said, addressing Cole with the confidence of someone used to being taken seriously. "We apologize for the interruption. This woman is our patient. She has a condition. She gets confused and she wanders, and her family is very worried about her. We're just here to take her home safely." Cole looked at him. Then he said, "What's her name?" The man blinked. Just once. "I'm sorry." "Her name," Cole said. "If she's your patient, what's her name?" A pause. "Her name is Margaret." "Margaret what?" Another pause. Shorter this time because the man caught himself hesitating and knew that hesitation was a problem. "Margaret Collins." Margaret heard her own breath pull in. Her name was Whitmore. She had never been Collins. Cole's face did not move. "Where's your facility?" "I'm sorry, your care facility. The one she's a patient at." "Where is it?" "It's located outside Billings. Address." The man's professional composure was still intact, but it was working harder now. "Sir, I understand your concern, and it's very kind of you, but this really is a private medical situation." "You said she's confused," Cole said. "But she walked up to me and spoke clearly and told me what was happening. Confused people don't usually navigate parking lots and start conversations with strangers. So either she's not as confused as you're saying, or she is confused, in which case you're a stranger trying to put a confused elderly woman in a car, and I'm not going to let that happen." He paused. "Either way, I'm not moving." The second man, the one who had not spoken yet, took a small step forward. One of the Hells Angels shifted, just his weight, just slightly, but the second man stopped. The first man said, "We have official documentation." "Show it to me." "Sir, we're not required." "You're right, you're not," Cole said, "and I'm not required to move. So we're both standing here being exactly as not required as we feel like being." Margaret was standing behind Cole's left shoulder. She was watching the two men with the kind of attention she used to give crossword puzzles, looking for the pattern beneath the surface. She leaned slightly forward and said quietly enough that only Cole could hear, the second one. Look at his right ear. Cole did not make it obvious, but he glanced. The second man had an earpiece, very small, flesh-colored, barely visible, but visible. Cole looked at the first man again. "Who are you talking to?" he said. The first man's expression did not change, but he stopped arguing. He just looked at Cole, then at Margaret, then back at Cole, and then very calmly, very deliberately, he said, "This isn't over." And the two of them turned and walked back toward the blue sedan. Cole watched them go. He did not relax, not yet. He turned slightly toward Margaret and said, still watching the parking lot, "You want to come inside?" "Yes," she said, "please." She followed him into the diner. They sat in a booth in the back corner, Cole's choice, Margaret noticed specifically because it had clear sight lines to both the front door and the parking lot windows. She did not comment on it. She filed it away instead, the way she filed away small things that told her larger truths about people. The waitress brought coffee without being asked. Cole wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at Margaret across the table. "Okay," he said, "tell me what's actually happening." Margaret looked at him. She spent 3 seconds studying his face. She had spent 74 years learning how to read people, and she was very good at it, better than most, which was part of why Ethan had trusted her. She looked at Cole Harrison, and she saw a man who had grown up being underestimated by people who should have known better, who had developed as a result a very particular kind of patience, the kind that comes not from calm, but from having chosen long ago to measure the world by action rather than appearance. She saw a man who was not performing sincerity, who did not need her to think well of him, who was simply sitting here because she had asked him to, and who was asking her what was happening because he genuinely wanted to know. She reached into her collar. She pulled out the thumb drive. She set it on the table between them. Cole looked at it. He did not touch it. "My grandson's name is Ethan Whitmore," Margaret said. "He's 31 years old. He worked as a forensic financial investigator. He was hired by a private firm to audit several investment funds that had irregularities. He was good at his job, very good." She paused. "3 weeks ago, he called me. He told me he had found something that was much larger than the audit he had been hired for. A network. He used that word specifically, not just one company, not just one person. A network of people who had been moving money through shell accounts, manipulating regulatory filings, paying off investigators. And this is the part that frightened him most, buying silence from people inside federal oversight agencies." Cole said nothing. Margaret continued. "He told me he was going to try to get the information to the right people, but he said he was worried because he was having trouble telling who the right people were. The people he thought he could trust kept turning out to have connections he hadn't expected." She looked at the thumb drive. "He sent me this. He sent it to my house, to my name in an envelope, with no return address, wrapped in a piece of paper that said, 'If something happens to me, find someone completely outside the system. Someone who has no reason to be bought and no way to be pressured.'" Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And Ethan, where is he now?" Margaret's hands wrapped around her coffee mug tightened. "I don't know," she said. "He was supposed to call me 6 days after he sent this. He didn't call. I tried to reach him. His phone went to voicemail and then stopped accepting messages. I tried his apartment. His neighbor said she hadn't seen him in over a week." She looked up at Cole. "I went to the police. A local detective took my information and told me they would look into it. 3 hours later, a man in a suit knocked on my door and told me that Ethan was fine and that the investigation was classified and that I should stop asking questions." She let that sit. "That was the moment I left." Cole stared at the thumb drive. He said, "You've been carrying this for 7 days." "Yes. And those two men outside, they've found me 3 times, Margaret said. "Each time I've managed to leave before they could get close. Tonight," her voice dropped slightly, "tonight was the closest they've been." Cole picked up his coffee. He drank. He set it down. He said, "You said Ethan told you to find someone with no connection to money, politics, or government." "Yes. And you chose us." "I chose you," she said. "I chose you specifically." She looked at him. "You didn't flinch. When I came up to you, you didn't calculate whether helping me was worth the trouble. You just asked me what I needed. That is extremely rare in my experience, and I have a great deal of experience. Cole looked out the window toward the parking lot. The blue sedan was still there. He watched it for a long moment. He said, the man with the earpiece. He was taking orders from someone. Those two weren't the operation. They were the front of it. Yes, Margaret said, I know. Which means there are other people. Coordinating, watching. Almost certainly. And the information on that drive? Ethan told me it contained documentation of every transaction, every communication, every payment they had made over 6 years. Names, dates, amounts, account numbers. Enough to prosecute. She paused. Enough that the people involved would do a great many things to make it disappear. Cole was quiet for a long time. Outside, the rain kept falling. The parking lot lights made the wet asphalt gleam. The blue sedan had not moved. A man that slid into the booth beside Cole. Margaret recognized him from the parking lot, younger than Cole, maybe 40, with a red beard and quick dark eyes that had already swept the room and cataloged everything in it before he sat down. Cole said Dex. The man named Dex said blue sedan hasn't left. One of them is on a phone. Call's been going on for 8 minutes. Cole said, they're getting instructions. Yeah, Dex said, instructions from someone who's not happy. He glanced at Margaret. She the one, this is Margaret, Cole said. She has something that certain people would like very much to take from her. Dex looked at Margaret with an expression that was not soft exactly, but was direct in a way that felt honest. He said, you okay? Margaret said, I am significantly better than I was 20 minutes ago. Dex almost smiled. Fair enough. Cole said, get Jake and Terrence inside. Tell Porter to stay on the lot. He paused. And tell him to get the plate on that sedan. Dex was already sliding back out of the booth before Cole finished the sentence. Margaret watched him go. She said, you do this often. Cole said, do what? Organize in situations like this. Cole looked at her. There was something in his expression that was not quite humor, but was in the neighborhood of it. Not quite like this, he said. Usually it's somebody's ex-husband showing up somewhere he shouldn't, or a kid who's gotten himself in over his head. This, he looked at the thumb drive. This is something else. I know, Margaret said. I'm sorry for involving you. You didn't involve me, Cole said. You asked for help. That's different. You asking was a question. Me staying was a choice. He looked back toward the window. My choice. 2 more men came and settled into nearby seats, not in the booth, just close enough to be present. One of them, a quiet man with gray at his temples and a face like weathered fence post, put a coffee in front of Margaret without being asked. She had not touched her first cup. She looked at the coffee. She looked at the men around her, and something in her chest, which had been wound tight as a clock spring for 7 days, released just slightly. Cole said, Porter's going to run the plate. That'll tell us something. In the meantime, he leaned forward. The people you said were paying off investigators. Ethan, was he working with anyone? Anyone who might still be clean? Margaret said. He mentioned a colleague, a woman named Dr. Sarah Okafor. She worked with him for about 8 months before. She paused. He trusted her. He said she was careful and she didn't have family connections that could be used to pressure her. Cole said, do you have contact information? No, but I know the firm they both worked for, Applied Forensic Partners, based out of Denver. Cole nodded. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, the men outside are waiting for instructions. When those instructions come, things are going to move quickly. We need to be ahead of that. What are you thinking? Margaret asked. Cole said, I'm thinking we need to not be in this diner when they move. Where would we go? Somewhere they haven't been told to look yet. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. He sent a text, just a few words. Margaret couldn't read them from her angle. He set the phone face down on the table. We have a place about 40 minutes east of here. It's quiet, it's not connected to any of us on paper, and the people who know about it are people I'd trust without thinking about it twice. Margaret looked at him. She said, you're going to help me. Cole said yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment, not in the way of someone searching for an answer, in the way of someone deciding whether the true answer was the right one to say. Then he said, because you came to me when you had nowhere else to go, and because the people following you are clearly the kind of people who count on everyone else looking the other way. He met her eyes. I've spent a long time being the person other people look away from. I know what it costs to walk up to someone and ask for help when every other option is gone. He picked up his coffee. Your grandson was right. You needed someone with nothing to gain and nothing to lose. That's us. Margaret held his gaze. She said, he's a good boy, Ethan. He works very hard and he cares about things being right, not just legal right. Her voice did not break, but it bent. I need him to come home. Cole set down his cup. He said very simply, then let's work on that. Porter came through the diner door fast, his jacket dark with rain. He leaned close to Cole and spoke quietly. Cole listened. His face did not change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Margaret. He said, the plate on that sedan is registered to a company called Veritas Consulting Group, LLC. Does that name mean anything to you? Margaret's breath stopped for just a second. Then she said, that was one of the names Ethan mentioned. On the phone, he said Veritas was the center of it, the hub, the company all the shell accounts came back to. Cole looked at Dex across the room. Dex had heard. He gave a small nod. Cole said to Margaret, then this is bigger than they told us. Margaret said, I've known that for 7 days. Cole stood. He was taller standing than he looked sitting down. He said, we're going to move in about 3 minutes. Finish your coffee. He paused. Can you ride? Margaret blinked. On a motorcycle? Yeah. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. I can ride, she said. I rode my husband's Triumph for 20 years before he passed. I haven't lost the muscle memory. Something shifted in Cole's expression. Not quite a smile, but the space where one could live. All right, he said. Then let's go. Outside through the diner window, Margaret watched the blue sedan. The window on the driver's side was down slightly, and a thin trail of cigarette smoke drifted out into the rain. The man inside was still on his phone, still waiting for instructions, still certain probably that an old woman in a diner had nowhere to run. Margaret picked up the thumb drive and tucked it back against her chest. She thought of Ethan. She thought of the look on his face the last time she had seen him in person 3 months ago, Thanksgiving dinner at her house in Billings, when he had been quieter than usual and she had asked if he was okay and he had smiled and said, I'm fine, Grandma. Everything's fine, and she had known even then that it was not fine, that something in her grandson's world had shifted into dangerous territory, but she had not pushed him because she had thought there would be time later. There was no later, there was only this. She set down her coffee cup. She stood. She walked toward the door. 3 minutes turned into 90 seconds. Cole came back from the short hallway near the restrooms and said 2 words to Dex. They moved. And that was enough. The entire group shifted like a single organism, bodies already angling toward the exit before the sentence was finished. Margaret felt the change in air pressure before she fully understood what was happening. Chairs scraping, jackets pulled, voices dropping to nothing, and then Cole's hand was at her elbow, not grabbing, just present, a point of contact that said, stay with me, we're going now. She stayed with she went now. Dex pushed through the back exit, first the one the staff used for taking out trash, and the cold air hit Margaret in the face like a slap. She did not slow down. The parking lot behind the diner was unlit and uneven, and she navigated it by feel and instinct, and Cole matched his pace to hers without being told, without making a performance of it, just adjusting the way a person does when they are genuinely paying attention to another person instead of simply being near them. Blue sedan pulled around to the south side, Porter said, materializing out of the darkness beside Cole's shoulder. Driver got out. He's on foot near the front entrance. Where's the second one? Still in the car, running something laptop maybe. Cole said they've got backup coming. 2 vehicles, Porter said. I clocked them turning off Route 9 about 4 minutes ago, moving slow, watching addresses. Cole processed that without stopping walking. How much time? Maybe 6 minutes before they boxed the lot. 6 minutes. Margaret did that calculation in her head and did not like the answer. Cole's motorcycles were parked together, still in their original row along the far edge. He went to the second one from the left, a dark, heavy machine that looked like it had been built for exactly this kind of night, and handed Margaret a helmet without ceremony. She took it. She put it on. She swung her leg over the back of the seat with the ease of a woman who had done this 10,000 times before, because she had, and she felt Cole register that behind her. Felt the small adjustment in how he held the handlebars, the slight recalibration of someone who had expected to spend energy helping her up and now had that energy free for something else. Hold here, he said, putting her hands at his sides. I know, she said. The engine turned over. Around them, the other 5 bikes came to life in sequence, and the sound was enormous in the quiet behind the diner. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just enormous. The kind of sound that occupies space at a molecular level. They moved. Not fast, not yet. Cole pulled out slowly, heading north on the access road, rather than back toward the main lot. And Margaret heard somewhere behind her a shout, one of the suited men. She thought voice cracking with the specific frustration of someone who has been patient for a long time and has just watched their plan dissolve, and then the engine opened up and the cold air wrapped around her completely, and Montana spread itself out in front of them, dark and enormous and indifferent. For 30 seconds, Margaret Whitmore felt nothing except the road and the engine, and the fact that she was still moving. That was enough. They rode for 45 minutes, not the 40 Cole had estimated, because Dex, riding behind them with his phone in his jacket pocket, tracked the 2 additional vehicles for the first 20 minutes, and twice called out alternate routes through a headset system. Margaret hadn't noticed until Cole's hand moved to his ear, and he tilted the bike left without explanation, and she tilted with him. He did not tell her where they were going. She did not ask. She had made the decision to trust him in a diner parking lot, and she was not in the habit of making decisions and then arguing with herself about them. The building they stopped at was a low, wide structure set back from a dirt road surrounded on 3 sides by open land. It smelled like machine oil and pine and coffee left on a warmer too long. Inside, it was lit by overhead fluorescents that gave everything a sharp, functional clarity. There were workbenches along one wall, a space heater in the corner that someone had already turned on, a folding table near the center with 4 mismatched chairs pulled up around it. A woman was standing by the table. She was maybe 50, with short silver hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she had spent years doing physical work and was comfortable in her body because of it. She looked at Cole when they came in, then looked at Margaret with an expression that was assessing but not unkind. Cole said, "Ruth Ann." The woman said, "You look like you've been in the rain." "We have been." "She okay?" "She's better than okay," Cole said. "She's the reason we're here." Ruth Ann looked at Margaret with a recalibrated attention. "You hungry?" she said. "I've got chili on." Margaret discovered in that moment that she was extraordinarily hungry. She had not eaten since a gas station sandwich at noon, which had been bad, even by gas station sandwich standards, and the smell of actual food in an enclosed space made something animal and urgent rise up in her. "Yes," she said, "thank you." They sat at the folding table, Cole, Margaret, Dex, Ruth Ann, and a man named Jake who had barely spoken since the diner, but who had eyes that cataloged everything and forgot nothing. Porter came in 20 minutes after the rest of them, slightly out of breath, and reported that the 2 additional vehicles had gone north looking for them before doubling back, confused. "They lost us," he said. "For now," Cole said. "For now," Porter agreed. Ruth Ann set a bowl in front of Margaret. Margaret ate. Nobody made her feel self-conscious about how fast she ate, and she appreciated that more than she could have easily expressed. Cole waited until she was halfway through before he said, "Tell me about Ethan's colleague, Dr. Okafor. What exactly did he say about her?" Margaret set down her spoon. She was not offended by the timing. She understood that there was urgency in play and that Cole was trying to balance giving her a moment against the reality of how little time they probably had. He said she was the one who first spotted the secondary account structure. He'd been looking at the primary filings and something wasn't matching up in the depreciation columns. He described it to me, but the details are beyond my financial expertise. And Sarah was the one who said, "Wait, look at this," and pulled up a layer of subsidiary accounts that shouldn't have existed. They spent 3 days reconstructing the movement of funds together. Margaret paused. He said she was meticulous, and that she had no debt, no family pressure points, no obvious vulnerabilities. He trusted her because she had no angle. How long ago was this? The call was 3 weeks ago, but he said he'd been working with her for 8 months. Dex said from his end of the table, "Applied Forensic Partners in Denver. I can run that." Cole nodded. Dex pulled out his phone. Ruth Ann said from the counter, "What's on the drive?" Margaret looked at her. Ruth Ann said, "You don't have to tell me. I'm asking because if we're going to figure out who to take it to, it helps to know what we're working with." Margaret reached into her collar and set the drive on the table again. Looking at it in the hard fluorescent light, it was a remarkably ordinary object for what it contained, a small black rectangle. Ethan had written nothing on it. No label, no mark. She said transaction records spanning 6 years, shell company structures, communication logs between executives and regulatory officials, payment records. She paused. Ethan told me there were also recordings, audio files of conversations that had been made without consent. He didn't tell me how he obtained them. The table went quiet. Cole said, recordings of who? He didn't say specifically. He said, she stopped. She closed her eyes for a moment. She was reconstructing the phone call from memory, playing it back the way she had played it back every day for 3 weeks, looking for details she might have missed. He said there were conversations between principals of the organization and someone in a senior oversight position. He said the name on those conversations those were his words, would be enough to end the investigation before it started if the wrong person heard them first. Jake, who had said nothing until this moment, said, he means someone was protected. Yes, Margaret said, I believe so. Cole leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He was working through something, she could see it, and she gave him the space to do it because she recognized that look. Ethan had that look, that same quality of internal motion that didn't express itself in fidgeting or talking, but in stillness, paradoxically, in a stillness that was full rather than empty. He said, the men in the parking lot, the ones tracking you, they're not the organization itself. They're a layer, hired probably. The people who hired them would be insulated 1 or 2 steps removed. Yes, Margaret said, that's what Ethan believed, which means the people at the center of this don't know exactly what's on the drive. Margaret thought about that. They know he found something. They may know it's significant, but the specific contents, right, Cole said, they're hunting the object without knowing exactly what the object contains. He straightened. That's important, because it means they're afraid, and people who are afraid make mistakes. Dex looked up from his phone. Applied Forensic Partners is real. Denver-based firm, 12-year history, clean reputation. Dr. Sarah Okafor is listed on their team page. He paused. Or she was. The page was last updated 8 months ago. Her name is gone now. The room shifted. Margaret said, gone. Removed from the site. No announcement, no mention. Dex turned the phone so Cole could see it. But I found a LinkedIn profile that hasn't been updated. She was still listed as a senior investigator there as of, he squinted, 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, Cole said, and Ethan went quiet 3 weeks ago. Margaret felt the implication land in her chest like something dropped from a great height. She said, if Sarah was compromised, then Ethan knew the walls were closing, Cole said, which is why he called you when he did. He wasn't being cautious. He was running out of time, and he knew it. Margaret looked at the thumb drive. She thought about her grandson, 31 years old, thin-shouldered and serious, who had cried at her husband's funeral at the age of 12 and apologized for it afterward, as if grief were something to be embarrassed about, and she had held his face in her hands and told him that crying was what people with hearts did. She thought about the way he laughed at his own jokes before the punchline, always every time helpless against his own sense of humor. She said, he's alive. I know he's alive. I don't have any evidence for that, and I understand that might sound like an old woman refusing to accept reality. But I know my grandson and the people who want this drive would have told me he was dead if they wanted me frightened into giving it up. The fact that they haven't, that they're still approaching carefully, still pretending to be officials with paperwork and patient care stories, tells me they don't want me fully panicked. They want me manageable. And they only want me manageable if Ethan is something they still need. The table was quiet. Ruth Ann said from the counter, she's not wrong about that logic. Cole looked at Margaret for a long moment. He said, I think you're right. I know I'm right, Margaret said. I've been running this through my head for 7 days. Cole said, then we have 2 problems. First, we need to verify what's on that drive without opening it on a compromised device. Second, we need to identify who we can actually give it to someone clean, someone with enough authority that the protected party can't make it disappear. How do we verify it? Margaret said. I know someone, Cole said, former military. He does security consulting now, the technical kind. He's not connected to any government contract. He doesn't do politics, and he owes me a significant favor from about 4 years ago that he has never stopped being uncomfortable about. Where is he? Billings. We were just in Billings. We were in the south end, he's in the north, different part of town. And the people following you, they won't be expecting us to double back. Dex said, that's either smart or stupid. Usually those are the same thing at the right moment, Cole said. He looked at Margaret. This is your call. You've been carrying this for 7 days. You know better than any of us what the risk level feels like. Margaret looked at the drive. She thought about Ethan's voice on the phone. His careful, low, deliberate voice choosing words the way a careful man chooses steps on uncertain ground. She thought about what he had said right at the very end of the call before he hung up. Grandma, I love you. I'm sorry this is landing on you. You deserve better than being pulled into this. And she had said, Ethan Michael Whitmore, you stop apologizing for doing the right thing. She looked at Cole. She said, double back. Cole stood. He said to Dex, get Marcus on the phone. Tell him we're coming and tell him it's not optional. Dex was already dialing. Cole said to Ruth Ann, how's your cousin doing these days? The one in the DA's office. Ruth Ann turned from the counter. Her expression was careful. Clean, she said. As far as I can tell. Why, because I might need a name, Cole said. Someone inside the system who's genuinely outside the network. I'll make some calls, Ruth Ann said. Quietly. Quietly, Cole agreed. Jake stood and moved toward the exit without being told. Porter followed. Margaret watched the efficiency of it, the way this group functioned, not with military precision exactly, but with something warmer and more durable than military precision. With the particular competence of people who have worked through genuine difficulty together and know each other's instincts. She stood. Her body protested in several places, her lower back, her right knee, the base of her neck. 7 days of car seats and tension and bad sleep had accumulated in her joints like sediment. She did not let it show. She picked up her coffee cup, drank what was left of it, and set it on the table with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been managing her own limitations since long before it became strictly necessary. Cole looked at her. He said, you don't have to come on the bike again. Ruth Ann can drive you. Margaret looked at him. She said, I came in on the bike. Cole almost smiled. Okay. They were outside and moving in under 4 minutes. The cold had sharpened since they arrived, and the sky had that particular dense darkness that precedes a change in weather. Margaret settled behind Cole and felt the engine come alive under her, and thought for just a moment, in the space between one breath and the next, about her husband Thomas, who had loved his triumph the way some men love a piece of music, not for what it could do, but for what it felt like to be inside the doing of it. She thought that Thomas would have liked Cole Harrison. He would have understood immediately what kind of man this was. They rode north. Dex's voice came through Cole's earpiece at the 20-minute mark. Marcus says he's in. He says, and I'm quoting directly, here he says he better not end up in federal prison over this. Cole said without raising his voice, tell him he won't. A pause, then Dex again. He says he's holding you personally responsible for that. Tell him that's fair. Another pause. He says okay. The address Marcus gave them was a residential street in North Billings. The kind of neighborhood that looked unremarkable by design. The kind where every house was the same and nobody looked twice at anything. Cole parked 2 blocks away and walked. Margaret walked with him. Dex came around the other side of the block on foot. Porter stayed with the bikes. The house they stopped at had a single light on in the front window. The door opened before Cole knocked. The man standing there was 40 compact with a face that had been rearranged at least once and had healed at slightly different angles. He wore a gray technical shirt, and he looked at Cole with the expression of a man who is deeply annoyed and deeply involved at the same time and is not sure which one is winning. You said this was a favor, Marcus said. Mana could destroy my career and possibly my freedom, kind of favor. It's not that bad, Cole said. Not that bad, Marcus repeated. He looked at Margaret. Something in his expression recalibrated. Ma'am, thank you for opening the door, Margaret said. He stepped back. They came in. The front room had been converted into what looked like a professional workspace. 2 monitors, an array of cables equipment Margaret could not name arranged with obsessive neatness on a folding table. Marcus pulled a chair out for Margaret without theatrics and sat at his equipment with his back to them for 30 seconds, doing something preparatory that Margaret didn't try to interpret. He turned and held out his hand. Drive. Margaret looked at Cole. Cole said, he's good. She put the drive in Marcus's hand. Marcus inserted it into a device that was connected to a laptop that was not connected to any network Margaret could see. He typed for a moment. He was quiet, he scrolled, he typed again. The room was so still that Margaret could hear the weather changing outside the wind, picking up the first sounds of what would become rain again by morning. Marcus said without turning, "How long has he been missing?" "3 weeks," Margaret said. Marcus said, "And the company that employed him, Applied Forensic Partners." "Yes. They're listed as a creditor in 3 separate bankruptcy filings for companies connected to a holding group called—" He stopped. He scrolled something. He stopped again. He was very still for a moment that lasted long enough to be noticeable. Cole said, "Marcus." Marcus turned his chair around. His face had changed, not in an obvious way, in the specific way of someone who has just seen something they were not expecting to see, something that shifted the problem from theoretical to immediate. He said, "I know one of these names." Cole said, "Tell me." "I can't," Marcus said. "Not directly. Because if I'm right about what I think I'm looking at, then saying this name in a room, any room, puts everyone in the room in a particular kind of danger that I am not okay with." Marcus. "I'm serious, Cole." Marcus looked at Margaret. "What your grandson found, he didn't just find corruption, he found the architecture of it, the infrastructure. The reason it's survived this long is that the people who built it didn't just buy officials, they built systems, systems that look like normal business processes, systems that have fail-safes." He turned the laptop screen slightly so Cole could see it, but kept his voice controlled and low. "The name I recognized. This person, this individual, chairs the oversight committee that would normally review an investigation into this kind of financial misconduct." The silence in the room was complete. Margaret understood what that meant. She had been a high school teacher for 31 years, which meant she had spent 3 decades translating complicated things into language that could be understood by someone encountering them for the first time, and her brain did that translation automatically. The person who would oversee any legitimate investigation into this network was also on the payroll of the network itself. The investigation could be buried not by blocking it from outside, but by controlling it from the top. She said, "How many people know this?" Marcus said. "Based on what I'm seeing here before your grandson found it." He paused. "Probably nobody outside that room." Cole said, "So Ethan didn't just find corruption. He found the kill switch." Marcus said, "He found the whole machine." Cole stood up from where he had been leaning against the wall. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment without speaking, and Margaret watched him process it, watched the weight of it settle on him without crushing him, the way a structural beam settles under load, stress distributed and absorbed. He said, "What are our options?" Marcus said, "Normally you'd take something like this to the FBI field office or to a federal prosecutor. But if the oversight committee is compromised, then anyone inside that system who receives this first has the ability to route it to the wrong hands." He paused. "There are 2 pathways that might actually work. One is a congressional oversight office that operates independently of the committee in question. The other is a specific category of federal inspector general. There's one I know who operates with a direct reporting line that bypasses the compromised committee entirely." "You know him," Cole said. "I know of her," Marcus said. "I've never met her, but she's real, she's clean, and she's been looking for something to substantiate a suspicion she's had about this committee for 2 years." Margaret said, "How do we get to her?" Marcus looked at her with the expression of a man revising his assumptions about someone in real time. He said, "Through a chain of people who are genuinely outside the system, which is—" he almost laughed but not quite, "which is apparently what you've already built tonight." Cole turned from the window. He looked at Margaret. He looked at the drive still in Marcus's hand. He said, "We need to duplicate that." Marcus said, "I can make 3 copies in under 12 minutes. Do it." Marcus turned back to his equipment. Cole came and sat across from Margaret at the small table near the wall. He sat the way tired people sit, not collapsed but honest about the weight of the day. He looked at her and said quietly enough that Marcus couldn't hear, "How are you holding up?" Margaret considered the question seriously, the way it deserved to be considered. She said, "I am frightened. I am exhausted. My back hurts and I haven't slept more than 3 hours consecutively in a week." She paused. "And I am more clear-headed than I have been since this started. Because I am no longer running. I am doing something." Cole nodded. He said, "Your grandson raised you well." Margaret looked at him. "I raised him," she said. Cole said, "Yeah, that's what I meant." The printer cycled. 3 drives plus the original. Marcus held them up, each labeled with a tiny piece of tape, 1 mark, 2 marks, 3 marks, 1 dot. He said, "Where do these go?" Cole looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at the 4 small objects in Marcus's palm. She thought of Ethan. She thought of what he had said, trust no one in suits. And then she thought of what she had figured out on her own in 7 days of running. The opposite of a suit is not a motorcycle vest. The opposite of a suit is someone who has chosen for their own reasons to stay outside the systems that create the kind of people who build corruption and call it infrastructure. She said they go to the people who have nothing to gain from burying them. Cole looked at her. He said, "Then we've got work to do." Outside, the wind had made its decision about the rain, and the rain was beginning to fall again, steady and cold and impartial. The way weather is always impartial, caring nothing about the small, urgent human dramas playing out beneath it, giving the same rain to the hunters and the hunted to the corrupt and the righteous, to an old woman who had not given up, and a man who had decided in a parking lot in the rain that walking away was not actually one of his options. Marcus handed Cole the drives. Cole looked at them for a moment. Then he put them in his jacket in separate pockets. He said, "Let's move." Marcus's front door had barely closed behind them when Dex's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. He looked at Cole. He said nothing, just turned the screen so Cole could see it. And Cole read the message in 2 seconds, and his jaw did the thing it did when something bad had become worse. Porter had texted 4 words, "Third car, same plate, family." Cole said, "They found the street." Dex said, "Not the house yet. Give them 4 minutes." They moved without discussion. Margaret was already pulling her helmet from where Cole had left it hanging on his handlebar. She had clocked its location when they arrived out of a habit she had developed over the past week of always knowing where her exit was. Cole noticed. He said nothing about it, but she felt him notice the way you feel someone revise their understanding of you without making a production of it. Marcus appeared in his doorway, holding a canvas bag. He pushed it toward Cole. "External hard drive with a full mirror of everything on those drives," he said. "Encrypted. Password is the last 4 digits of the number you used to call me 4 years ago when you needed that thing done in Missoula." Cole said, "You remember that number?" Marcus said, "I remember everything about that night, Cole. That's why I answered the phone tonight." He stepped back. "Go. I was never here." Cole said, "You were never here." Marcus closed the door. They were on the bikes and moving inside 60 seconds, and this time they rode hard, not recklessly, but with the urgency of people who understand the exact shape of the window they are operating inside. Margaret held tight and leaned into the turns and didn't waste energy on fear. Fear was a luxury right now. Clarity was the currency. Porter fell in behind them from a side street, which meant he'd been watching, which meant the third car hadn't reached the block yet, which gave them the margin Cole had calculated barely but enough. Dex's voice came through the headset. "Where are we going?" Cole said. "Ruth Ann's sister, Laurel." A pause. "Laurel Voss." "Yes." "Cole, I know what she is," Cole said. "Does she know we're coming?" "She will in about 30 seconds. Dex went quiet. Margaret could hear him on a call brief and direct the kind of conversation that assumes cooperation, rather than asking for it, which told her something about the network of trust that Cole Harrison had built over whatever years it had taken him to become the man she had grabbed in a parking lot. This was not improvisation. These were people who had been in difficult situations before together and had come out the other side, and the fact that they were here tonight awake, moving committed, was the compound interest on years of being worth trusting. She thought about that as they rode. She thought about what it meant that a group of men the world had largely written off as dangerous and undesirable had become, in the span of a single wet Montana night, the most reliable thing standing between her and the people hunting her. She thought about Ethan, who had been the smartest person in most rooms. He entered from the age of 9, who had spent his career inside systems and institutions and professional structures, and who in his most desperate moment had told his grandmother, "Find someone with nothing to gain and nothing to lose. Not someone with credentials, not someone with a title, someone real." Ethan had understood something that most people spend their whole lives failing to understand. She held tighter to Cole's jacket and they rode north. Laurel Voss lived on the 2nd floor of a building she also worked in, which saved time on the drive because everything important was already in one place. She was 62, 5'4", with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the organized calm of a woman who has spent decades being the steadiest person in whatever room she entered. She was an investigative journalist, had been for 38 years. She had published in 5 national outlets, had been subpoenaed twice and had refused to name sources both times, and had a reputation in certain circles as someone whose phone calls you returned because the alternative was always worse. She opened the door before they knocked. She looked at Cole. She looked at Margaret. She looked at the 3 men behind them and said, "How many vehicles are we dealing with?" Cole said. "3 confirmed, possibly more by now." "And the drives," Cole said. "Copies. Marcus made 4. Laurel's expression did not change except in a specific place around her eyes that Margaret recognized as the look of someone who has just understood that the story is bigger than they thought it was and is deciding in real time whether to be frightened or interested. For Laurel Voss, it took approximately 2 seconds. Interest 1. "Come in," she said. "All of you, quickly." Inside, Laurel went immediately to a second room and came back with a laptop and a device Margaret didn't recognize. Small, rectangular, with a single blue light that pulsed when she connected it. She held out her hand without preamble. Cole placed one of the drives in it. She said, "I need 10 minutes. Cole said, "You have 8. She sat down and got to work. Cole stood near the window with his arms crossed. Dex sat on the floor against the wall, which surprised Margaret for a moment before she realized it was simply the most efficient position from which to watch the door. Porter stayed in the hallway outside with the bikes. Jake, who had been shadow quiet since the diner, took a position near the interior door, with a stillness that Margaret had started to understand was not passivity, but its opposite, a state of absolute readiness that conserved itself by making no unnecessary movements. Margaret sat in the chair across from Laurel and watched her work. After 4 minutes, Laurel said without looking up, "This colleague of your grandson's, Okafor, she's mentioned in 3 of these files." Margaret went very still. "In what context?" "As a co-author of the initial audit flags. Her name is on the internal documentation, the original report that would have gone to the firm's principals." Laurel scrolled. "And there's a separate file here, a correspondence thread between someone at Applied Forensic Partners and a law firm in Washington." She paused. "The law firm represents Veritas Consulting Group." Cole from across the room said, "What does the correspondence say?" Laurel read for a moment. Her face went quiet in the specific way that faces go quiet when the information is exactly as bad as you suspected. "The law firm contacted Applied Forensic Partners approximately 7 weeks ago. The subject line of the initial email is personnel matter urgent." She paused. "The response from someone at AFP initials RT says, quote, the individuals in question have been removed from the project and will not present further complications." Margaret heard the phrase land in the room. Removed from the project, will not present further complications. She said, "Ethan and Sarah." "That's my read," Laurel said. She looked up at Margaret for the first time since she had sat down. "How much did Ethan tell you about the recordings?" "Only that they existed. He said there were conversations between principals of the network and someone in an oversight position. He said the name would be enough to end any investigation if it reached the wrong hands." Laurel looked at the screen for a moment. "I think I know whose name it is." Cole pushed off from the window. He crossed the room in 4 strides and looked at the screen over Laurel's shoulder. Margaret watched his face. She saw the moment he saw it. His expression did not collapse. Cole Harrison's expressions never collapsed, but something behind it shifted very fundamentally, the way the ground shifts in the second before an earthquake, when everything is still technically standing, but the integrity is already gone. He straightened. He said, "That's a senator." Laurel said, "Yes." Cole said, "That's a sitting United States senator." "Yes, Cole, it is." The room was absolutely still. Dex said from the floor, "You're serious." Laurel said, "I have never been less interested in being anything but serious." Margaret sat in her chair and looked at the faces of the people around her and understood in that moment what Ethan had meant when he said the name would be enough to end any investigation. A sitting senator on the oversight committee, not a functionary, not a mid-level official who could be managed and replaced. A senator whose entire political identity was built on being a watchdog, whose public presence was constructed around accountability, whose face appeared on newspaper profiles about integrity and governance. The perfect place to hide. Dex said, "Can we prove it's him just from the audio?" Laurel said, "I'd need to listen to the files, but from the metadata on the correspondence and the account numbers that cross-reference the payment records." She looked at Cole. A good prosecutor could work with this. A very good prosecutor with enough time and enough protection. Cole said, the inspector general that Marcus mentioned. Laurel looked at him sharply. You talked to Marcus tonight. He duplicated the drives. Laurel was quiet for 2 seconds. Which inspector general? Cole said. He didn't give me a name. He said she was someone who'd been looking for grounds to move on this committee for 2 years. Laurel set down the laptop. She took off her reading glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. These were the gestures of a woman who was working through several competing calculations simultaneously and was not going to speak until she had finished. Then she said, her name is Denise Farrow. She's been in the IG's office for 11 years. She's been auditing the committee's oversight practices on the quiet for about 18 months, which I know because I have a source inside her office who trusts me enough to tell me things they probably shouldn't. She looked at Cole. If what's on this drive is what I think it is, Denise Farrow is the correct person, but she can't receive it through any normal channel. The moment it enters official channels, it triggers a review process in the committee. Even with the senator recused, has enough operational influence to delay and bury. Cole said, so how do we get it to her? Laurel said. Through me. Cole stared at her. Laurel said, I have her personal contact information, not her office number, her personal. She gave it to me 8 months ago and said, these are her exact words. She said, if something lands in your lap, that's too big for the normal path, you call this number directly. Don't go through channels. Don't send email. Call this number. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Cole said she was waiting. She was expecting, Laurel said. There's a difference. She didn't know what form it would take or when it would come, but she's been doing this long enough to know that things this size eventually find a way to the surface. Margaret said, and you trust her. Laurel looked at her. I trust that she has spent 11 years being impeccably careful in a system that rewards the opposite of careful, and that she has not yet been caught doing anything other than her job. In my experience, that level of discipline over that length of time is either the product of genuine integrity or the product of a psychopathic patience. I can't distinguish from it. She paused. But I've met her twice, and both times I came away thinking she's the real thing. Margaret thought about it. She thought about Ethan's voice. Trust no one in suits. She thought about what that phrase actually meant. Not a prohibition on suits themselves, but a prohibition on the system. They represented the interlocking structure of institutional authority that had been so thoroughly compromised that its own internal corrective mechanisms no longer function. She thought about who existed at the edges of that system. People like Cole and his men, who were outside by exclusion. People like Laurel Voss, who were outside by choice. And people like Denise Farrow, who were technically inside the system, but operating by Laurel's account in a deliberate and sustained state of resistance to what the system had become. She said, call her. Laurel looked at Cole. Cole nodded. Laurel picked up her phone, her personal phone, not the one on the desk, and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a voice low and clear answered with a single word, yes. Laurel said, it's Voss. I have something. It's the size of thing you told me to call about. Possibly larger. She paused. Are you in a place where you can talk? A pause on the other end. Then give me 2 minutes. Laurel lowered the phone. She looked at the room. She said, she's moving somewhere secure. The 2 minutes felt longer than 2 minutes. Margaret used them to go over everything in her mind, not the fear which was still there and was not going anywhere, but the shape of what they had built in one night. A parking lot, a diner, a back road, a safe house, a technical expert, a journalist, 4 copies of a drive that contained enough to bring down a senator, a consulting network, and 6 years of sustained systematic corruption, built from scratch by people who had no structural reason to be in the same room. Ethan had been right. The phone crackled. The voice returned. Voss, I'm here. I have a colleague with me, someone who has been physically in possession of the primary documentation for 7 days. She was designated by the investigator who compiled it. Laurel paused. The investigator has been missing for 3 weeks. A pause. How reliable is the documentation? I've reviewed it in the past 6 minutes. It's structured, sourced, and internally consistent. I can verify the financial records from public filings. The correspondence is authenticated. The audio files I haven't listened yet, but the metadata and the cross-reference account numbers would be sufficient for a civil proceeding. The audio takes it to criminal. Another pause, longer this time. Then, how many people know what's on it? Laurel looked at the room. She said, the people in this room. The voice said, I need to know who that is. Laurel said, me, a journalist with 38 years of source protection, the woman who carried the drive, and several individuals who have no connection to any government agency or financial institution. She said it plainly without editorializing. On the other end, a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh. The bikers, the voice said. Laurel blinked. I'm sorry. There were reports earlier tonight. A woman and a group of motorcyclists who evaded a surveillance unit in a diner parking lot in Billings. A pause. I've been watching those reports come in for 3 hours, trying to understand what they were connected to. Another pause. Tell me her grandson's name. Margaret, who had been listening from across the room, leaned forward. Laurel said Whitmore. Ethan Whitmore. The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. Then the voice said, I know that name. I've seen that name in a filing I wasn't supposed to see 6 weeks ago, connected to a personnel action at Applied Forensic Partners. Her voice was still controlled, but something in the texture of it had changed. Is it said, before she could stop herself, I believe so. A pause. Then speaking to Margaret directly for the first time, why? Because the people hunting me want me manageable, not terrified. They haven't told me he's dead. They could have. They haven't. Silence. Then Denise Farrow said, that's a very careful observation. I've had a week to make it. Mrs. Whitmore. A pause. It is Mrs. Whitmore. Ms. Whitmore. Margaret. Margaret, the voice steadied. I'm going to need you to do something that is going to feel counterintuitive after 7 days of running. I'm going to need you to stop moving and stay exactly where you are. Margaret looked at Cole. Cole said, how long? I need 12 hours, Farrow said. Maybe less. I need to get a team into Montana through a channel that bypasses the committee entirely. I have the authority to do that, but I need to do it cleanly, and clean takes 12 hours. Cole said, the people following her have 3 vehicles in Billings. They've already been to 1 location tonight. They'll have a geographic search pattern by morning. Then stay somewhere they can't pattern match to her, Farrow said. Not a hotel, not a credit card, nothing on her name, her car, her phone. We're already past all of that, Cole said. A pause. Who am I speaking to? Cole said his name. Farrow said, are you going to be where she is for the next 12 hours? Cole said, yes. She said, then I'm going to trust that. And there was something in her voice that was not sentimentality and was not performance. It was the voice of a professional who has learned through long experience to make accurate assessments of people she has never met, who was doing exactly that right now, and who was saying assessment, complete trust, extended. Voss, I'm going to send you a secure file path in the next 10 minutes. Upload the complete drive contents there. All copies. Do not send by any other method. Laurel said, understood. And Margaret, a pause. I want you to understand something. What your grandson found, what he sent to you, this is the kind of thing that doesn't come along very often. The kind of thing that people spend careers trying to build a case toward and almost never reach. Another pause. He was right to protect it, and you were right to run with it. Margaret said, I know, a small pause. Yes, Farrow said, I think you do. The call ended. The room let out a collective breath. Dex said, so that just happened. Cole said, yes. Jake said from the door, you trust her. Cole looked at Margaret, not at Jake, at Margaret, because she was the one who had spent 7 days developing a finely calibrated sense of who could be trusted and who was performing trustworthiness, and he knew that, and he was asking the right person. Margaret thought about the voice on the phone. She thought about the 4-second silence when she heard Ethan's name. She thought about the question, is he alive? And the way it had come out, not procedural, not strategic, but human. The way a person asks about another person when they have a face to put to the name. She said yes. Cole nodded. He looked at Laurel. Get the upload done, fast. Laurel was already connecting the drive. Cole moved to the window. He stood there with his arms crossed, watching the street below. Margaret came and stood beside him. Not because she needed protection exactly, but because standing beside him felt in some way she couldn't fully articulate like the right place to be. He said quietly, you doing okay? She said, I keep thinking about what Ethan's office looked like the last time I visited him. He had these neat rows of files in this completely catastrophic mug collection. 12 mugs on a desk meant for two all different sizes, none of them matching. He said he bought a new one every time he started a new project. She paused. I keep thinking that wherever he is, there are no mugs. Cole said nothing for a moment. Then he said, we're going to find him. You don't know that, Margaret said. No, he said, but I know we're going to try. And I know the difference between trying and not trying. She looked at his profile, the gray in his beard, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the face of a man who had been told probably hundreds of times that he was the wrong kind of person, that his life had been the wrong kind of choices, that the leather and the patches and the road meant one specific thing about who he was inside. She said, how long have you been doing this, taking care of people who don't have anyone else? Cole was quiet for a moment. He said, since I was old enough to realize that if I didn't, nobody would. She held that. Then she said, Ethan would like you. Cole said, then I look forward to proving that directly. Dex said from across the room, uploads running, 40%. Laurel said, file path received. Pharaoh's system is accepting. Jake said, we've got a car that's been around the block twice. The room shifted immediately. Cole moved from the window. Margaret stepped back. Dex was already at the interior door, and Porter's voice came through the headset from the hallway low and fast. Dark SUV tinted windows, no plates I can read. Cole said they're scouting, not moving yet. Dex said 60% on the upload. Jake said if they make one more pass, they will, Cole said. And when they do, they'll stop, which means we have about 4 minutes before this address is compromised. Laurel said without looking up from the laptop. I can finish the upload and wipe the local copies in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Cole said, then you've got 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Dex said, and us. Cole looked at Margaret. He looked at the drives in his jacket. He said, we split. Laurel finishes the upload, stays here, and plays journalist working late, which is what she is. The rest of us move before that SUV comes around again. Margaret said, where? Cole said, I know a place they won't look. He did not elaborate. Margaret had learned in the past several hours that when Cole Harrison said he knew a place, he meant it in the most literal and specific sense, and that asking him to elaborate was unnecessary, because the elaboration would come when it was needed and not before. Laurel said, upload complete, wiping local. Cole said, good. He looked at her. You know what to do. Laurel said, I've known what to do for 38 years, Cole. Go. They went. Down the stairs, out the back, through an alley, Margaret navigated by staying close to Cole's shadow. The cold had reached the temperature where it had a texture, where it pressed against skin rather than simply existing against it. Porter had the bikes running barely just enough to keep the engines warm without announcing themselves. They mounted and moved without headlights for the first 3 blocks, which was illegal and which Margaret did not comment on, because the thing about a carefully calibrated danger is that you don't protest the small violations when they are in service of surviving the large ones. They were 4 blocks away when her phone, the one Cole had given her, a clean prepaid purchased with cash by Ruth Ann before they'd left the safe house, buzzed. A text, unknown number, 2 words. She read it twice. Her breath stopped. She reached forward and put her hand on Cole's shoulder. He felt the pressure change and ease the throttle. She leaned close to his ear. She said, I just got a text. He said, from who? She said, it says, Grandma, I'm okay, don't stop. Cole held the bike steady. He didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. Then he said, he's alive. Margaret did not cry. She had spent 7 days building a wall between herself and the possibility of that message, because on the other side of that wall was the version of events where it was too late, and she could not afford to spend time near that version. But the wall came down now all at once, quietly and completely, and what rushed in was not grief, but something that felt like the precise opposite of grief, something that had no good English word for it, but that Margaret Whitmore felt in every part of her 74-year-old body. She said, keep going. Cole said, yes, ma'am. And they rode into the dark Montana night with a senator's name on a drive in Cole's jacket and a 2-word text on a prepaid phone and 12 hours between them. And the moment when everything this corrupt and carefully constructed machinery had been built to prevent would finally irreversibly begin. The text had come from a number that traced to nowhere a burner. Obviously the kind you buy at a gas station with cash and use once and destroy. But Margaret was not thinking about the number. She was thinking about the word grandma. Lowercase, no comma. The way Ethan actually typed always, because he had learned to text on a phone that auto-corrected grandma to grandma, and he had spent 2 years fighting it and eventually just turned autocorrect off entirely and never turned it back on. She knew his typing the way she knew his handwriting. It was him. Cole had not told her to put the phone away, and she had not put it away. She held it against her palm for the next 20 minutes of writing, not reading it again. She had already memorized it, just holding it the way you hold something that has become in an instant the most important object in the room. They stopped at a building on the north edge of a residential street. Cole's man, a quiet one named Danny who Margaret had not met before tonight, who appeared to have been waiting for them with the lights off, opened a side door and said nothing except everyone's in, which meant something specific to Cole because he relaxed by approximately 5 degrees, which on Cole Harrison was the equivalent of another man collapsing into a chair. Inside, Ruth Ann, who had driven here separately, Jake, Porter, and a woman Margaret didn't recognize, maybe 65, with close-cropped, gray hair, and the focused bearing of someone who works with her mind for a living and is currently working very hard. Cole said, "Who's this?" Ruth Ann said, "My cousin, the one in the DA's office, retired DA's office. Now she does federal coordination work." Ruth Ann looked at the woman. "Miriam, this is Cole, and this is Margaret Whitmore." The woman named Miriam looked at Margaret with an expression that was careful and unpatronizing at the same time. She said, "I've been briefed. I understand there's been contact from Pharaoh's office." Cole said, "The upload went through 40 minutes ago." Miriam said, "I know. Pharaoh called me 11 minutes ago." She paused. She wanted boots on the ground here before morning, someone she trusts who's already in the state. Cole said, "And that's you." Miriam said, "That's me." She looked at Margaret again. "Your grandson sent a message." Margaret said, "I received it. Can I see it?" Margaret handed over the phone. Miriam looked at the text. She looked at the metadata on the message timestamp carrier prefix and handed it back. She said, "The number he used, it's a prepaid registered in Missoula, purchased 4 days ago." Dex said, "He's been in Missoula." "Or someone who knew how to get a message to you was," Miriam said. "The text was routed through 2 relay points before it hit your phone, which means either Ethan is very careful." "He is," Margaret said, "or someone is helping him be careful." She looked at Cole. "Pharaoh is pulling records on Applied Forensic Partners' satellite office in Missoula. They have a storage facility registered to a subsidiary there. If Ethan was trying to get additional documentation or reach a secure location he had pre-identified, he'd go somewhere he'd already scouted," Cole said. "Yes. Missoula is 3 hours. 2.5 the way you ride," Miriam said, with the dry precision of someone who has been briefed on exactly who she's working with. Cole looked at Margaret. He said, "It's your call." Margaret said, "It's not a call. We go." Dex said from the corner, "Cole, the 3 vehicles that were running the search pattern in Billings. 2 of them dropped off the radar about 20 minutes ago." Cole said, "Dropped off how?" "Stopped moving. Parked. Which means they either gave up." "They didn't give up," Cole said. "Or they got new information and they're repositioning." The room processed that in silence. Margaret said, "They know about the upload." Everyone looked at her. She said, "Think about it. The upload went through 40 minutes ago. 20 minutes after that, 2 of their 3 vehicles stopped moving. That's not coincidence. Someone inside Pharaoh's receiving system flagged the upload." She paused. "Or the upload itself triggered an automated alert on their end, some kind of monitoring on keywords or account numbers." Miriam was already on her phone. She stepped away, speaking low and fast. Cole said, "If the upload triggered something, then they know we've made contact with Pharaoh," Margaret said, "which means the 12-hour window just changed." Miriam came back. Her face was controlled, but her pace was faster than before. She said, "Pharaoh is aware. She's moving up the timeline. She's activating her team. Now she'll have federal marshals in Billings by 6 a.m., but she needs us to hold our position until then." Cole said, 6 a.m. is 4 hours. "Yes. And the vehicles that repositioned, she doesn't know yet." Miriam looked at Cole. "What she does know is that the senator's office made 3 phone calls in the last hour to numbers associated with the private security firm connected to Veritas Consulting." The room went very still. Margaret said, "He knows." Miriam said, "He knows something. Whether he knows the full extent, it doesn't matter what extent he knows," Cole said. "What matters is that he's making calls, which means he's activating people." He looked at Dex. How many can we put on the perimeter? Dex said, everyone we have here, plus I can get 4 more from Harlan's crew in 40 minutes. Call Harlan. Dex was already dialing. Miriam said, I need to tell you something. She said it to the room, but she was looking at Margaret. I've been doing federal coordination work for 9 years. In that time, I have seen cases this size get within arm's reach of resolution and then disappear. Not because the evidence wasn't there, not because the prosecutors weren't capable, but because the people being prosecuted understood the architecture of the system better than the people trying to prosecute them. They knew which lever to pull, which relationship to activate, which delay to introduce. She paused. What's different here, the only reason tonight has a different feeling is that the evidence landed outside the system entirely, which means they have never had to defend against this particular approach. She looked at Cole. They don't have a move for this. Cole said, because they've never had to outmaneuver a group of bikers and a 74-year-old woman. Miriam said, correct. From the corner, Jake said in his economical way, car on the street, slow. Cole moved. Dex moved. The room reorganized itself in under 3 seconds, not chaotically, but with a purposeful efficiency that Margaret had come to recognize as the kinetic vocabulary of people who have been in enough difficult situations to have stopped wasting motion in them. Porter threw the headset from outside. Black sedan, single occupant, driving at about 15 miles an hour. A pause. He's looking at addresses. Cole said 1 car, they sent one. Dex said scouting. They still don't have the address confirmed. Give them 2 passes. If they slow on the 3rd, we move. Margaret stood in the center of the room and watched the people around her with the clear-eyed attention she had spent her whole life developing. She watched Cole measure information and make decisions without agonizing over them. She watched Dex manage communication channels the way an air traffic controller manages airspace, everything in motion. Nothing colliding. She watched Ruth Ann, who had not left since they arrived, standing near the back wall with her arms folded and her expression composed the face of a woman who is not central to the operational moment, but is absolutely central to the moral one. The kind of person whose presence in a room shifts the temperature towards steadiness without saying a word. The phone buzzed. Margaret looked at it. Unknown number, different from the first one. She answered. A voice, young male, slightly out of breath, said, Grandma. The word hit her like a physical thing. She put her free hand on the table beside her because for 1 second her balance was not reliable. She said, Ethan, I don't have long. His voice was low and careful, the same voice from the phone call 3 weeks ago, but with something added to it now, not fear exactly, but the particular alertness of someone who has been operating in genuine danger long enough that caution has become habitual. Are you safe? Yes. Are you? For now, I'm with. A pause, a sound in the background she couldn't identify. I'm with someone who's been helping me. She found me 4 days ago. Her name is Sarah. Margaret's breath stopped. She said, Sarah Okafor. A silence on Ethan's end. He said, you know about Sarah. We know about Sarah, Margaret said. She was listed on the documentation. And AFP removed her from their system around the same time they removed you. She paused. Where have you been? Moving in, he said. Sarah figured out they were watching the usual channels, so we've been staying completely dark. No cards, no registered addresses. She knows some people in Missoula who, he stopped. Another sound in the background. Grandmother Drive, do you still have it? The information is already in the hands of the right person, Margaret said. It's done, Ethan. A longer silence. Then very quietly, it's done. It's done. She heard him exhale. It was the most complete sound she had heard in 3 weeks. Not relief exactly, because relief implies the danger is over, and it was not over yet, but the sound of someone who has been carrying an unbearable weight and has felt it shift just slightly onto other shoulders. He said how Margaret said, I found someone you'd approve of. Cole, who had moved to her shoulder the moment she answered, said, Ethan, my name is Cole Harrison. I need you to tell me exactly where you are right now. A pause, then to Margaret. Who is that? Someone who has been keeping me alive for the past several hours, Margaret said. Tell him where you are. Another pause. Margaret could hear Ethan making the decision, the same calculation she had made in a parking lot, the same read of available information, the same leap of faith that is not faith exactly, but the most rational choice available, when all the irrational ones have already been eliminated. He gave an address. Cole looked at Dex. Dex was already moving. Cole said, "Stay there. Don't open the door for anyone except a woman named Ruth Ann or anyone she's with." "Can you stay for 4 hours?" Ethan said. "We've managed 4 days." 4 hours, Cole said. "After that, federal marshals come to you. Legitimate, verified Pharaoh's people. You don't open the door until you have verified Pharaoh's name through a channel you trust independently. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good," Cole said. "Put your grandmother back on." Ethan said, "Grandma." Speece said, "I'm here." He said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I put you through this. I thought I could contain it, and then it got so much bigger so fast, and you were the only person I could think of who they couldn't predict." His voice broke slightly on the last word, just slightly, the way it had broken at Thomas's funeral, the same specific frequency of a young man trying very hard to be composed and not entirely succeeding. "You deserve better than this." She said exactly what she had said on the phone 3 weeks ago, because it was still true and would always be true. "Ethan Michael Whitmore, you stop apologizing for doing the right thing." A pause, then, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "I love you." He said, "I love you too. I'll see you in 4 hours." The call ended. The room looked at her. She looked at the room. She was not going to cry in front of these people, not because she was ashamed of it, but because there wasn't time. And also because the feeling inside her right now was too large and too complex and too specifically hers to express in a way that the moment had space for. She said, "He's with Sarah Okafor. They're in Missoula. They've been there for at least 4 days." Miriam was already on her phone. Cole was already talking to Dex. The room was in motion again, that familiar, purposeful reorganization, and Margaret stood in the center of it and breathed and held the phone against her chest and thought about her grandson's voice. Porter came through the door from outside. He said, "Sedan made a third pass, slowed in front of the building next door. Not this one." Cole said, "They're off by one address. For now." "How long before they correct?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. They're being careful." Cole said, "We have 30 minutes to change the geometry." He looked at Miriam. "Can Pharaoh accelerate the marshals?" Miriam said, "I'm asking now." Cole said to the room, "We have 4 copies of the drive, one with Pharaoh through the secure upload, one on me, one that Marcus is holding in a location they don't know, one that Laurel has." He paused. "The people outside don't know about Pharaoh's upload. They think the drive is still just a physical object that one of us is carrying, which means they'll go after the physical object." Dex said, "So we give them one to chase." Cole said, "We give them one to chase." Margaret said, "The copy on you." Cole looked at her. She said, "You ride out with it, visible enough that they pick you up. You lead them away from Ethan's location and away from this building. The marshals intercept on your route." She paused. "And the original upload is already with Pharaoh, which means the drive you're carrying is a decoy, and it doesn't matter if they take it because the real damage is already done." Cole looked at her for 3 full seconds. He said, "You've been planning that since the call with Ethan ended." "I've been planning it since the sedan made its second pass," Margaret said. "I just waited to see if you'd arrive at the same place." Jake said from the door, "Did he get close enough?" Margaret said. Cole pulled one of the drives from his jacket. He turned it in his fingers once. He said, "The risk is they stop me before the marshals." "You've outrun them twice tonight already," Margaret said. "On roads, you know." She met his eyes. "And frankly, you look exactly like someone who might be transporting something valuable, which is what we need them to think. Your appearance," she paused, "which people have been using against you for your entire life, is going to work for you tonight." Cole held her gaze. He said, "You are something else, Margaret Whitmore." She said, "I'm a 74-year-old retired school teacher from Billings, Montana. Don't let it go to your head." Dex almost laughed. Almost. Miriam came back from her call. "Pharaoh is moving the marshals up. She can have 2 vehicles in position on Route 87 in 90 minutes. But she needs to know the road." Cole said, "Tell her east on 87 out of Billings toward Roundup. I'll be the one on the Black Heritage Softail doing about 75. Miriam relayed it word for word. Cole put the drive back in his jacket. He looked at the room. He said, "Dex Porter, Jake, stay with Margaret and Miriam. Ruth Ann, I need you to take the 3rd vehicle and get to Missoula, Ethan's address." He looked at Margaret, who gave it to him, and he gave it to Ruth Ann. "You knock on that door, you say your grandmother sends her love, and Cole sends a warning. They'll open it," Ruth Ann said, and then you wait with them until Pharaoh's people get there. You do not leave them alone. He paused. Not for any reason. Ruth Ann said, understood. He looked at Margaret. He said, this works. She said, I know. He said, Pharaoh has the upload. The senator's name is in the system. The moment her team files it becomes public record, and they can't undo it. Ethan is alive and in contact. We have 4 hours. He paused. This work. She said, Cole. She waited until she had his full attention. Thank you. He looked at her with that expression she had cataloged over the course of the night. Not quite a smile, but the honest human thing that lives in the same place as smile lives. He said, you walked up to me in a parking lot and grabbed my arm. Yes, that took courage. It took desperation, she said. Most courage does, he said. He pulled on his jacket. He walked to the door. He looked back once, not at the room in general, but at her specifically, and then he went out. She heard the engine turn over. She heard it move away. She heard it open up on the street outside, the sound diminishing fast in the way of something that is moving with intention, and then it was gone. Dex sat down at the table. He said, now we wait. Margaret sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She said, tell me about Cole. How long have you known him? Dex said, 15 years, since I was 25 and I was doing something genuinely idiotic in a parking lot outside a bar in Bozeman, and he was the one who talked me out of it instead of walking past. He paused. I was not at that point someone who deserved to have someone stop and talk to him. But Cole doesn't make that calculation the way other people do. He doesn't decide first whether you're worth the trouble. He just sees someone who needs something, and he responds to that. Dex looked at the door. I've been watching him do that for 15 years. Margaret said, that's the quality that's very difficult to teach someone. Dex said, you can't teach it. Either you've got it or you don't. He looked at her. He said the same thing about you, you know. In the diner after you told him about Ethan, he said she's the real thing. Margaret absorbed that. She said, he said that. Those words, yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Porter said from the window, sedan's moving, heading north. Dex straightened. North is 87. Yeah, Porter said. They picked him up. Something in Margaret's chest tightened to a specific and unpleasant point. She managed it by doing what she had done every time in the past 7 days when fear tried to become the loudest thing in the room. She named it, she acknowledged it, and she set it aside in favor of the next concrete thing she could do. She said to Miriam, when Pharaoh's marshals make contact with Cole, how will we know? Miriam said, she set up a relay through me. I'll get a text. How long on the 90 minutes? Miriam checked the time. 47 minutes now. Then we have 47 minutes? Margaret sat very straight in her chair and looked at the table and thought about everything. She thought about the drive that was now in Cole's jacket on a highway in Montana. She thought about Ethan in a Missoula address waiting for Ruth Ann to knock on his door. She thought about Denise Farrow in an office somewhere activating the machinery of legitimate prosecution, moving people and paperwork through channels that the senator's network had never had to account for because they had never imagined this specific sequence of events. She thought about Laurel Voss working in her second-floor apartment, 38 years of careful journalism, behind her probably already drafting something that would ensure that even if the legal process stumbled, the story would not stay quiet. She thought about Cole Harrison on a dark highway riding toward federal marshals carrying a decoy drive that the people chasing him didn't know was a decoy, drawing them away from her grandson and away from the building where she sat doing what he had done in the parking lot of Delaney's diner, standing between someone who needed protection and the people who meant them harm. Not because he had to, not because it benefited him, because someone had asked. She thought about what the world had told Cole Harrison he was for most of his life. She thought about what he actually was. Miriam's phone buzzed. Margaret looked up. Miriam read the screen. Her expression did not break into a smile. She was not a woman whose face made dramatic movements, but something in it settled the way a question settles when the answer arrives. She looked at Margaret. She said, Pharaoh's marshals made contact. Cole is with them. He's safe. The drive had been taken into federal custody. The sedan that had followed him had been stopped 2 miles behind its occupants, detained for questioning under emergency provisions. Pharaoh had filed 20 minutes earlier through the independent channel that bypassed the committee entirely. The senator's network had reached the end of its operational ability to intervene and had not been told yet. Margaret said, and the senator, Miriam said, Farrow's filing triggered an automatic freeze on all committee communications as of 8 minutes ago. He can't make calls. He can't access internal systems. His office is currently being informed that a routine systems maintenance issue has interrupted their services. She paused, which is what they're telling his staff. What they're not telling his staff is that every communication in and out of that office for the past 6 hours has been logged and is now part of a federal record. Dex said he's done. Miriam said he's not done yet, but the window for him to do anything that would change the outcome closed approximately 8 minutes ago, and he doesn't know it yet. Margaret thought about that. She thought about a man sitting in an office somewhere still believing that his system of insulation and protection and carefully maintained relationships was intact, still making calls that were now being recorded, still believing that the machinery he had spent years building was operational. He had lost. He just didn't know it yet. And the thing that had brought him down was not another institution, not a more powerful political opponent, not a competing network of influence. It was a 74-year-old woman who had taped a thumb drive inside a Jane Austen novel and driven for 7 days on back roads, and a man in a leather vest who had decided not to walk away. Porter said, "Cole's coming back. ETA 20 minutes. Dex said, "I'll put coffee on." Margaret said, "Make enough for everyone." Dex looked at her. She said, "Ethan's going to want coffee when he gets here. He drinks it black, no sugar, in the largest available mug. He's particular about mugs." She paused. "He has a collection." Dex said, "Good to know." He went to find the coffee. Margaret sat at the table and folded her hands and breathed, and for the first time in 7 days, she breathed without calculating her next move at the same time. Just breathed, just sat, just let the room be what it was, warm, present, full of people who had spent the night when being exactly who they were with no apology for it. Outside somewhere on a Montana highway, the men who had been hunting her were sitting in a stopped car, not yet understanding that the object they had chased was worthless, that the real damage was already filed, already transmitted, already irreversible. Inside, a woman who had been called too old and too ordinary and too peripheral to matter waited for her grandson to come home. The coffee started brewing. The night was almost done. Cole came back 23 minutes later. He came through the side door the same way he had left, without announcement, without theater, and Margaret heard the engine before she heard the door, and she was already standing by the time he walked in. He looked the same as he had when he left, except for something behind his eyes that was different. Something that had been tested in the past hour and had come back changed in the specific way that things change when they have been under genuine pressure and have not broken. He looked at Margaret. He said, "It's done." She said, "I know. Miriam told us." He sat down at the table. Dex put coffee in front of him without being asked. Cole wrapped both hands around the mug and sat for a moment without speaking, and Margaret let him have the moment because she understood what it cost to carry something at speed through the dark and deliver it to the right hands, and then come back and sit in a lit room and let yourself breathe. Dex said, "2 in the sedan, both detained." Farrow's people found a second phone on the driver at a dedicated line, direct to a number registered to a law firm in D.C. that's already in the documentation as counsel for Veritas. Cole said they'll cooperate. Farrow thinks so. The law firm has more exposure than the drivers. When the drivers figure out they're the least protected people in the room, they'll talk. Cole nodded. He drank his coffee. He said, "What about the senator's office?" Miriam said from across the table, "As of 40 minutes ago, his chief of staff has been in a room with 2 of Farrow's people. The freeze on communications is holding. His personal attorney has been notified." She paused. "He made a statement to his staff tonight that there had been a routine systems issue. Nobody in his office knows yet what's actually happening." She looked at Cole. "He's going to know by morning." Farrow is timing the formal notification to coincide with the filing becoming public record, which happens at 7 a.m. when the federal court opens. Cole said, "So he checked the time. 3 hours of not knowing." Miriam said, "We thought 3 hours of making calls that are being recorded, 3 hours of activating contacts who are now also in the documentation." She paused. In Farrow's experience, she said those 3 hours are often more valuable than anything else in the case file. Porter said from the window, "Ruth Ann just texted. She's 20 minutes out from Missoula." Margaret closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. She said 20 minutes. Cole looked at her. He said, "You want to talk to him when she gets there?" No, Margaret said. I want to see him. There's a difference. She paused. Is it safe to move toward Missoula? Cole looked at Miriam. Miriam said Pharaoh has cleared a route. She has two vehicles running a parallel track on 90. If we stay on the back roads, the exposure is minimal. She paused. She also said, and I'm quoting her directly, she said, tell that woman she's earned the right to go wherever she wants tonight. Dex said, high praise from Pharaoh. Miriam said, you have no idea. Cole stood. He looked around the room at Dex, at Porter, at Jake, at Miriam, at the folding table, and the four mismatched chairs, and the space heater in the corner, and the empty coffee mugs. He had the expression of a man who is about to say something and is deciding whether the words he has are adequate to the thing he is trying to say. He said, all of you, tonight. He stopped. He started again. There's no version of this where it works without every person in this room. I want that said out loud before we move. Nobody made a production of it. Nobody needed to. Dex nodded once. Porter said, let's go get her grandson. Jake moved toward the door. Cole looked at Margaret. She said, let's go. They rode to Missoula. The back roads at 3 in the morning had a quality of deep stillness that was neither peaceful nor threatening. Simply factual, the world going about its nighttime business without regard for the human urgencies passing through it. Margaret rode behind Cole and felt the accumulated exhaustion of 7 days in every muscle she owned, and she held it in the same way she had held every hard thing in the past week by setting it aside and focusing on the next thing. And the next thing right now was a building in Missoula where her grandson was alive and waiting. Ruth Ann texted at the 40-minute mark. We're inside, both fine. Ethan says to tell you he has approximately 11 things to apologize for and is prepared to do it in order of severity. Margaret showed the text back of Cole's helmet. She did not know if he could see it. She showed it anyway. They arrived at the building, a plain 3-story residential structure that had been someone's rental property for decades and showed every year of it. And Ruth Ann opened the door before they reached it, which meant she had been watching, which meant the 40 minutes of waiting had been 40 minutes of a very careful woman monitoring her sightlines. Margaret walked through the door. Ethan was standing in the hallway. I was thinner than she remembered. He had not shaved in what looked like most of 3 weeks. There were marks of sustained stress in his face, around his eyes, and the set of his jaw, the physical evidence of what it costs a body to operate under genuine fear for an extended period. He was wearing a flannel shirt that was not his and jeans that were his, and he was holding a coffee mug with both hands, a large one with a cartoon map of Montana on it, and when he saw her he said, Grandma, and his voice broke completely on the second syllable in a way he did not try to prevent. She crossed the hallway in 4 steps and put her arms around him. He was taller than her by 8 inches. He had been taller than her since he was 15. She had not let that stop her from holding him the way she held him now, thoroughly without apology. Her arms across his back and her face against his shoulder, and he bent his head down, and she felt him exhale against her hair, a complete and total exhalation, the kind that carries everything that has been held for weeks. She said against his shoulder, you are in so much trouble. He said, voice rough, I know. 7 days, Ethan. I know, Grandma, I know. You are grounded until you are 45. He made a sound that was either a laugh or a sob and was probably both. Yes, ma'am. She held on for another moment. Then she stepped back and looked at him. Really looked at him. The way you look at someone you have been afraid to lose. And she put her hands on either side of his face the way she had done when he was 12 and crying at his grandfather's funeral. And she said, are you hurt? No, he said, tired, scared for a while, but not hurt. Sarah, she's inside. He gestured behind him. She's Grandma. She's extraordinary. She figured out they were closing in on both of us independently, and she found me before they could. She's the reason we've stayed mobile. He paused. She's also the reason the recordings exist. She was the one who set up the documentation system. He stopped. You know about the recordings. We know about everything, Margaret said. It's all ready with Pharaoh. He stared at her. He said, Denise Pharaoh. Yes. How did you? He stopped. He looked past her at Cole, who had come in and was standing a respectful distance away with his hands in his jacket pockets. Ethan looked at him for a moment. He looked at the leather vest. He looked at the patches. He looked back at Margaret. She said, Ethan, this is Cole Harrison. Ethan looked at Cole. He said, you kept her safe. Cole said, she kept herself safe. I just provided some company. Ethan looked at him for another moment. Then he crossed the hallway and extended his hand. Cole took it. They shook hands with the specific gravity of people who understand exactly what the handshake means and are not reducing it to something less than that. Ethan said, "Thank you." Cole said, "Your grandmother is the most remarkable person I've met in a very long time. You raised her well." Ethan blinked. Margaret said, "He keeps saying that." Ethan looked between them. He said, "I don't understand that joke." Margaret said, "You will." A woman appeared in the doorway behind Ethan, 34, maybe 35, with natural hair and the watchful, precise eyes of someone who has spent her career looking for the discrepancy in the data, the number that doesn't add up, the thing that everyone else walked past. She looked at Cole. She looked at Margaret. She said, "You're the grandmother." Margaret said, "And you're Dr. Okafor." Sarah Okafor said, "He talks about you constantly. I was starting to think you were a myth." She paused. "I'm glad you're not." Margaret said, "I'm glad you found him." Sarah said, "He found most of the documentation. I just figured out how to preserve it." She paused. "And how to keep us both alive long enough for it to matter." She looked at Cole. "The upload went through," Cole said. "It's with Pharaoh, filed, time-stamped, irreversible." Something in Sarah's face, which had been carrying the careful composure of someone who has not allowed themselves to feel relief, because relief creates vulnerability, came undone very slightly just at the edges. She said 6 months in a voice that was smaller than her previous voice, almost to herself. 6 months we were building that. Ethan found the initial thread and I just kept pulling. She stopped. "I thought it was going to disappear. I thought they were going to make it disappear the way they made everything else disappear." Margaret said, "It didn't disappear." Sarah looked at her. She said, "No, it didn't." She paused. "Because you ran." Margaret said, "Because I had something worth running with." They stood in the hallway, all of them, Cole and Dex and Ruth Ann and Ethan and Sarah, and the moment had that particular quality that certain moments have, where the thing that has been moving very fast suddenly stops and the stillness is not empty, but full dense with everything that has happened to bring everyone to this exact point. Then Miriam's voice came through from Cole's headset. "Cole, Farah wants to speak to Ethan and Sarah. She's ready to brief them on next steps, and she wants Margaret on the call." Cole looked at Ethan. "Ready?" Ethan said. "I've been ready for 3 weeks." They set up the call on Miriam's secure line. Pharaoh's voice came through, clearly controlled, direct. She said, "Mr. Whitmore, Dr. Okafor, I'm going to keep this brief because we have limited time and because you've both already done the hard part. The filing is in. My team has secured the primary documentation and 3 copies. We have federal marshals en route to your current location ETA, approximately 75 minutes, who will provide protected transport to a secure facility where you'll both be formally debriefed." She paused. "The individuals responsible for your disappearance and for the surveillance operation against Mrs. Whitmore, they are either in custody or effectively neutralized. The individual at the center of the oversight network." She paused. "He's currently in his office. He doesn't know yet." Another pause. "He'll know at 7 a.m. Ethan said, "And Applied Forensic Partners, the principals who cooperated with the law firm. They're part of the filing," Pharaoh said. "Obstruction and conspiracy charges are being prepared separately." She paused. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to understand something. What you built, the documentation, the correspondence chain, the account architecture. This is the kind of case that takes most investigators years and a team of 20 to construct. You built it in 8 months with 1 colleague and no institutional support." A pause. "That's not nothing," Ethan said quietly. "Sarah built half of it." Pharaoh said, "I know. Dr. Okafor's contribution is noted in the filing. Both of your names are on it as primary sources, which means both of you are protected under whistleblower statutes that this office will actively enforce." She paused. "You will not be abandoned. I want that said clearly." Sarah said from beside Ethan, "Thank you." Pharaoh said, "Thank your colleagues who got this to me." A pause. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you on this call?" Margaret said, "I'm here." Pharaoh said, 7 days. You carried this for 7 days without help, without institutional support, and without giving up." She paused. "I've been doing this for 11 years. I want you to know that what you did tonight, what all of you did tonight, is going to matter for a very long time." Margaret said, "My grandson did the work." Pharaoh said, Your grandson found the corruption. You made sure it survived long enough to count. A pause. There's a difference. You know that. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, yes, I know that. The call ended. The room held what it held. Ethan sat down on the floor against the wall, not dramatically, just because the adrenaline that had been holding him upright for weeks had finally, in the presence of his grandmother, and the knowledge that it was over, stopped doing its job. He sat with his knees up and his coffee mug in his hands and his head back against the wall, and he looked at the ceiling. He said, I have 11 mugs in my office. Margaret sat in the chair across from him. She said, I know. I don't know if they'll let me go back. They will. It's your office. What if AFP, Applied Forensic Partners, is going to have considerably larger concerns than your office for the foreseeable future? Margaret said. I wouldn't worry about your mugs. He looked at her. Something in his face that had been rigid for 3 weeks softened around the edges. He said, you're not even a little bit scared right now. She said, I was scared every second of every day for 7 days. I am done being scared for a while. He said, I got you into this. You got the truth into the right hands. And she said, I was the vehicle. I've been someone's vehicle for most of my life. Your grandfather's, your mother's, yours. It is one of my great privileges. She paused. And I have never been a more important vehicle than I was this week, so don't you dare apologize for it. He looked at her for a long time. He said, I want to meet Thomas. She knew he meant it the way young people sometimes mean things, not literally, but as a way of expressing a feeling for which the literal language is insufficient. He wanted the version of his grandfather who had ridden a Triumph through the Montana hills for 20 years, who had loved a woman who was now sitting cross-legged across from him, having just spent a week outwitting a senator's private security operation. She said, he would have thought you were the best thing he ever had a hand in. Ethan said, he helped raise me. He did, she said, and he was proud of it every day. From the doorway, Cole said quietly, 74 minutes. Ethan looked at him. Marshals. Coming in clean, Farrow verified the team herself. Cole looked at Ethan with the direct, unglamorized attention that was his consistent mode. Once they're here, you and Dr. Okafor are in their custody until the formal debriefing is complete. You understand that's the safest route. Ethan said, yes. Cole said, and your grandmother, Ethan said, comes with me. Cole looked at Margaret. She said, I'm going with him. Cole said, then that's the plan. Sarah came in from the other room. She was holding a phone, her own, the one she'd been using in the dark for weeks, a worn-out thing with a cracked screen and approximately 12% battery. She said, I just got a text from a number I don't recognize. She showed it to Ethan. It says, tell them it's already on the front page. Ethan stared at the screen. He looked at Cole. Laurel Voss, Cole said. Yvonne. She published it, Margaret said. It was not a question. Cole said, she filed the upload at the same time she submitted the story. The story goes public at the same moment the legal filing becomes accessible, which means, Dex said from the window, which means in about 2.5 hours, every news desk in the country is going to have the same information the federal court is processing. Ethan said he can't bury it. Cole said he never could, not anymore. A silence moved through the room, and it was different from the silences that had come before. Not the silence of held breath or managed fear or tactical calculation, but the silence of people sitting with the weight of something that has been accomplished, really and truly accomplished in the way that very few things in life are ever fully, completely, irreversibly done. Sarah sat down beside Ethan on the floor. She said quietly to him, we did it. He said, yeah. She said, I really wasn't sure we were going to. He said, I wasn't either, for a while. She said, what changed? He looked at his grandmother. He said, she ran. Margaret heard that. She held it. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn over something small and solid that turns out to be heavier than it looks. She thought about the parking lot of Delaney's diner, about the moment she had gotten out of her car with 2 men in suits walking toward her and a row of motorcycles in the distance, about the 3 seconds in which she had made the decision that had led in one long and terrifying and improbable chain of events to this room. To this moment, to her grandson sitting on the floor of a building in Missoula, saying she ran. She had not run away. She had run toward. There was a difference, and it was everything. The marshals arrived in 68 minutes, 4 of them in 2 vehicles with credentials that Ethan verified through the independent channel Cole had set up for exactly that purpose. They were professional, courteous, and efficient in the particular way of people who understand that the people they are collecting have been through something and do not need to be handled like cases. The lead marshal, a woman in her 40s, with the bearing of someone who has had this job for long enough that it has stopped surprising her, looked at the room when she came in at Cole and his men, at Miriam, at Ruth Ann, at Margaret, and she said with the brevity of genuine respect, "The Inspector General sends her thanks, all of you." Cole said, "How's it looking?" The marshal said, "The senator's office went dark about 30 minutes ago. His personal attorney arrived at 11:30 p.m. and hasn't left. The communications log from tonight is—" She paused. "Extensive. He was very busy between the 10 and midnight." She said it without editorializing. But the implication was clear. A man who does not know he is being recorded makes different choices than a man who does. Ethan said he called the law firm. "Among others," the marshal said, "we'll know the full picture by morning." They prepared to move. Sarah went first with two marshals. Ethan stayed long enough to shake Cole's hand again, a longer handshake this time with both hands, the kind that is less a greeting and more an acknowledgement of something that can't be fully put into words. He said, "I don't know how to." Cole said, "Don't try." Ethan said, "I want to." Cole said, "Then buy me coffee sometime when this is over and you're back in your office with your 11 mugs." Ethan almost smiled. It was a real smile, slightly crooked, that Margaret recognized as the smile he had been making since he was 7 years old when something genuinely pleased him. He said, "Deal." He looked at Dex, at Jake, at Porter, at Ruth Ann. He looked at all of them with the face of someone who understands that they are looking at people who chose when they had every reason not to choose something harder and better than the available alternatives. He said, "All of you, thank you. Nobody said you're welcome because nobody needed to." Margaret walked with Ethan to the door. Outside in the cold pre-dawn Montana air, she held his arm and they walked together to the marshal's vehicle, and she thought about all the times she had walked him somewhere, to his first day of school, to the car, after Thomas's funeral, to his college graduation, standing at the edge of things with her hand on his arm. And she thought that this was the last walk of that kind, the last time she would be walking him towards something he needed to be walked toward. After this, he would walk on his own with whatever he had built from what he had done, and she would be proud of him from the distance, that proud grandmothers stand at when their grandsons have become the men they always had the potential to become. At the car door, he stopped. He said, "Are you coming?" She looked back at Cole, who was standing in the doorway. He gave her a small nod. She said, "Right behind you." She turned to Cole. She said, "I'll be in touch." Cole said, "I know." She said, "You're going to be difficult to thank properly." He said, "Don't try. You already said thank you." She said, "I'll say it again." He said, "Margaret." She waited. He said, "Go be with your grandson." She looked at him for a moment. This man who had been standing in a parking lot doing nothing more significant than existing when she had grabbed his arm and changed both of their lives in a direction neither of them had predicted. This man who had been told his whole life that his appearance was the sum of him, and who had spent that whole life proving quietly and without announcement that it was not. This man who had ridden through a cold Montana night carrying a decoy drive toward federal marshals with the same uncomplicated steadiness he brought to everything. Because when Cole Harrison decided to do something, he did it completely. She said, "You are a genuinely good man, Cole Harrison." He said, "You are a genuinely good woman, Margaret Whitmore." She put her hand on his arm, the same arm she had grabbed in the parking lot, the same gesture but different now, in the way that the same gesture is always different when it carries a whole story inside it, and she held it for a moment and then she let go. She walked to the car. She got in beside Ethan. The door closed. The marshals drove. 3 hours later, the federal filing became public record at 7 a.m. exactly. 12 minutes after that, Laurel Voss's story appeared on the website of the national publication that had run her work for 21 of her 38 years in the field. The story carried no byline photo. It carried at the top a single sentence of attribution based on documentation provided by sources at significant personal risk. By 7:30, the senator had released a statement through his attorney denying all allegations. By 8:15, 3 of his closest legislative allies had released statements declining to comment. By 9 a.m., the law firm that had contacted Applied Forensic Partners issued a notice that they were withdrawing from representation of Veritas Consulting Group effective immediately. By noon, Veritas Consulting Group had suspended operations pending internal review, which is the corporate language for "we have been caught and we are trying to figure out how much we can protect before we cannot protect anymore." By 3 p.m., the senator's office announced that he would be taking an indefinite leave of absence for health reasons. In the federal debriefing room, where Ethan and Sarah had been for most of the morning, Denise Farrow entered at 2 in the afternoon, sat across from them, and said without preamble, "It's holding. Every element is holding. The communications log from last night is," she paused. "It's going to be the foundation of the criminal referral. He talked for 2 hours believing he was still protected, and everything he said is now part of the federal record." She looked at Ethan. "He gave us the last piece we needed without knowing he was giving it to us." Ethan said the calls he made to 2 of his colleagues on the committee, specific operational conversations about how to contain the story, who to contact inside the IG's office to delay the review. She paused. "He named people. He gave us the network he'd spent 6 years protecting in 2 hours of phone calls." Sarah said, "Because he didn't know it was over." Farrow said, "He still thought he had moves. He didn't understand that the moment the story went public alongside the filing, the window for any institutional response closed completely." She paused. "That was by design. That was Voss's call timing the publication. That was," she stopped. "It was a very well-coordinated operation." Ethan said, "For an operation put together in one night by a retired teacher and a motorcycle club." Farrow looked at him. She said, "I've run operations with 40 people in 8 months of preparation that accomplished less." She said it plainly without sentiment because it was a plain and factual thing. Margaret, who was sitting beside Ethan, said nothing. She was thinking about Thomas, about his triumph, about the feel of a motorcycle engine under her after all these years, about Cole Harrison standing in a doorway in the pre-dawn dark telling her to go be with her grandson. She was thinking about what it means to be underestimated your entire life. She was thinking about what it means to have that underestimation become in one specific night the exact thing that your enemies never accounted for and could not defend against. They had not looked for a 74-year-old woman because they had not believed a 74-year-old woman could be a threat. They had not looked at a Hells Angels parking lot because they had not believed that the men in leather vests were capable of the kind of loyalty and intelligence that the night had required. They had built a network of corruption on the assumption that certain categories of people were not worth accounting for, and that assumption had destroyed them. Not luck, not accident, not the intervention of some authority with more power than theirs. A woman who refused to stop, a man who refused to walk away, a grandson who had done the work, a colleague who had been meticulous, a journalist who had been waiting, a technical expert who owed a favor, a federal inspector general who had spent 11 years being impeccably careful for exactly this moment. None of them exceptional in the way that the word exceptional is usually used. All of them exceptional in the way that actually counts, present, committed, and unwilling to pretend that the easier choice was acceptable. Ethan put his hand over his grandmother's on the table. She looked at him. He said, "It's over." She said, "Yes." He said, "You okay?" She thought about it. The real answer, not the managed one. She thought about 7 days of back roads and cash payments and gas station food. She thought about a parking lot in the rain and a man with a gray beard who had said okay with the weight of a decision behind it. She thought about 4 copies of a drive that had dismantled 6 years of carefully constructed corruption in the span of one night. She thought about the thumb drive still in Farrow's secure system, her grandson's work preserved and permanent and real. She said, "I am considerably better than okay." Ethan looked at her for a moment. He said, "I'm going to take you somewhere good for dinner when this is all settled, anywhere you want." She said, "I want a place with large mugs." He laughed, a full, real, unguarded laugh, the laugh she had been listening to for 31 years, the laugh that had no self-consciousness in it because it never had, because that was who Ethan was, someone who laughed from his whole chest and never once thought about whether it was the right moment. She listened to it. She thought, there it is. There is the thing I have been running toward for 7 days. Not justice, not exposure, Not the senator's leave of absence, or the law firm's withdrawal, or the filing's timestamp, or Pharaoh's careful 11 years of patience. This, her grandson's laugh in a lit room on a morning when the worst was over. Everything else had been the work. This was the reason. She held it. She did not need to chase anything anymore. She did not need to run or calculate or measure the distance between herself and the people hunting her. She was 74 years old and she had done something that would matter long after she was gone, not because she was powerful, not because she was positioned, not because the system had given her a role in its own correction, but because she had simply stubbornly, completely refused to let the truth disappear. And that was enough. That had always been exactly enough. 2 weeks later, Cole Harrison received a package at the chapter's address. Inside was a large coffee mug, handmade ceramic deep blue with a small gold motorcycle painted on the side, and 7 stars arranged around it in a loose arc. No note, just the mug. He stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment. Then he went inside and put it on the shelf where it stayed, because some things are not for using, some things are for remembering. And some nights, the ones that start in parking lots in the rain and end in the first light of morning with justice filed and irreversible, and a grandmother laughing in a hallway, deserve to be remembered exactly as they were improbable, human, and absolutely, completely real. The woman everyone underestimated had carried the truth across 7 days of darkness, handed it to the right man in the right parking lot, and changed everything. That is what courage looks like when it is done by someone with nothing left to prove and everything left to protect.